Hi, it's Dustin Lanier. Thanks for listening. Please find me on LinkedIn for original public sector operations content every week. And please reach out to me if I and my team of procurement professionals at Civic Initiatives can help you be a public procurement change agent. Sarah O'Brien, thanks for joining us today. We're going to talk about the work of the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council and then draw some parallels into that on other things people ought to be thinking about in terms of the topics there. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about the organization?
Sure. I'm Sarah O'Brien. I'm the CEO of the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council, which is an organization that provides a multi-stakeholder kind of meeting place for primarily purchasers, institutional purchasers, both public and private sector, but also suppliers of sustainable solutions, advocates, researchers, others interested in moving forward sustainability using the lever of procurement. Okay. And that's it for us.
And how did you come to choose that as your way of serving?
Yeah, I started out as an advocate, environmental advocate, and spent time, all the way from bullhorns and signs, shutting down incinerators, through many years to legislative advocacy, particularly on issues around mercury and other persistent toxics in New England and nationally. And I'll tell you a little story that really is illustrative of why procurement. I had been involved in a long-term fight in the state of Vermont on a mercury reduction and disclosure bill. Took years and years, and one of the big issues was mercury disclosure. The lamp manufacturers at the time said it was impossible to tell purchasers how much mercury was in the lamps they were buying. And so we fought about that for several years. My next job, I was involved with procurement, and we went into a vendor conference. I think it was the state of California. And I think it was about a $30 million lamp contract. And the state of California said, well, we want disclosure on all the lamps on this contract, which was, thousands of lamps, a giant state contract. And one of the gentlemen who I had tussled with for years stepped right up from one of the companies and said, well, if you give us about 6 weeks, 2 months, we can get that done for you. And I thought, okay, here's the way to use the regular business process to drive change, right? So for that supplier, it makes sense. It's a huge contract, a huge a customer. So sure, they've got the incentive to make the change that will be better for the environment. And from my perspective, if I can find those folks who want to put their money toward these more sustainable solutions, it's a win-win. Everybody's moving forward on the issue instead of, spending 4 years fighting over it. So that kind of opened my eyes, and that was about 20 some years ago. And I've been in environmental purchasing first, and now broader sustainable purchasing ever since.
Great. So I'm Dustin Lanier. I'm with Civic Initiatives. We work on purchasing topics for clients around the country and are interested in the sustainability issue as it's come up for some of our clients in a couple of different flavors. So speaking of clients and members, Sarah, you guys have a pretty broad cross-section of members, both private sector folks who are interested in these topics, and then, of course, a variety of public sector participants. So why don't you tell us about who your members are and what kind of people from those entities tend to be involved in your work?
Sure. Well, we have, every few days we gain members. So we have around 160 organizational members. And we really run the gamut. Not only do we cross public, private sector purchasers, higher ed purchasers are a big constituency. Also, as I said, suppliers and others. But we have everything from, Fortune 100 companies like Microsoft down to small community colleges and small towns participating. And really the within those organizations, there are a number of kind of key folks that participate. First of all, CPOs in the public sector. We work with the state of California, and Angela Shell, the CPO of California, is on our board, as was Betsy Hayes, the CPO of Minnesota. So we have some of the real leadership. We have others who are often one person in a very large organization kind of tapped by their boss. Okay, now we need to do sustainability procurement. You do it. You coordinate or manage or bring everybody along, right? We have a lot of resources really focused on enabling. right? That's what we're here for, is to provide people with what they need when they need it, because they've got a job and often they come to this job without an extensive sustainability background. So we provide things like category guidance. If you're told, hey, we need to revolutionize our lumber buying, and you have no idea what the issues are, who might be working on them, what some model specifications or policies are, you can come to us and we have those packaged up. You can pull them down, work with your category manager, and kind of get to where you need to go quicker than just doing a web search, wandering around. We also, a really important thing that we do and that we think is critical for folks, whether leaders or just starting out, is to bring people together for critical conversations, right? So a lot of this work, because you want to align market signals in terms of sustainable purchasing, you don't want to differentiate on this. You want to do what other people are doing. We want to push to the cutting edge, but we want to actually copy and paste what each other's done so that suppliers get a really clear signal. Okay, I need recyclable content, and so do 500 other purchasers who've made that same request. For the supplier, that's then a clear driver for change, right? If all of us say, well, I need recycled content and I need carbon reduction and I need something else, the supplier really has a challenge parsing out what's most important for that organization to do to meet customer demand. So, a lot of that work we do, whether it's written down resources or whether it's those conversations that we convene, is about bringing people together to identify what's top priority and then move toward that unified ask to change the market.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And I mentioned to you, and I don't know if you're very familiar with State Ramp as a concept, but there's an NCI I interviewed a few weeks ago called State Ramp, that they bring vendors and buyers together into a platform to try to drive some standards that can be achieved once and used many times. Now, their mandate is cloud security, and the issue there is that not everybody who sells to states also sells to the feds, so they're building a parallel to FedRAMP. But the reason I bring it up is it's saying there ought to be some target that if we get to it, then we can use it across multiple entities and not have to redo it and redo it and redo it for every little village and township in the country. So are there any parallels on what you're trying to accomplish, but more on the sustainability side?
Yeah, I think very much so. That same idea that, look, if somebody's done the research, and often it's a very large, maybe it's the state of California where they've got a specific environmental imperative about air emissions. They've done research, they've got their procurement engineers, really working through what needs to happen, and they put something forward. Well, there's no reason. I mean, maybe the tiniest community college can't plug and play that, but they can take the sort of top line stuff and use it again. And again, that one of the reasons I think that some of our supplier members really like being part of the community is they can understand better. It's almost like a private focus group. They can understand better what people are looking for, and they can have the discussion where they, having understood that, if another purchaser comes to them sort of out of left field, they can say, well, I understand what you're looking for. We do this slightly differently because we've been asked by a number of organizations to do it this way. Will that meet your needs? And often it does meet their needs. It's an organization that, as you say, a small organization maybe has gone online, come up with something, and is perfectly happy with what other purchasers have settled on as kind of the best practice now. I think that the one thing that's critical, and this is always true with procurement, is that it's a cyclical process, right? So you ask for a set of goals or a set of attributes for a given product, say, at a given time, and you may then want to push the envelope further. That's an easier thing for a very large purchaser to do, whether private or public, to try and engage with suppliers and innovate and move the bar, a little further. And then all those smaller suppliers who don't have the purchasing power, but really want to, go along that sustainability journey, can also adopt that next iteration of what's required or expected of suppliers.
Well, it's been interesting because we've had a survey out on environmentally preferable purchasing, which is still going to be available for another several days. So I'll drop the URL at the bottom if people are on and want to participate. It's been interesting because we've tried to isolate in where does sustainability and procurement touch and how do they touch? And as I've been talking to different entities, I've gotten everything from, oh, I have a person inside of my shop and they have this responsibility and they work with purchasers. I've talked to other people who have, there may be a sustainability person or pledge, but that's over there and it hasn't really penetrated the purchasing shop. And I've talked to some shops who are like, we don't have anything, right? And so it really is across the board, like different sizes and shapes. So how do you build a connection between whatever the level of commitment to a sustainable environment that may have been made on a policy side? How do you connect that to the purchasing function, which is where a lot of the ability to express those mandates
happens,
right?
I mean, that's the first thing to realize is that, you know, the reason the SPLC exists, the reason this exists as sort of a discipline of sustainable purchasing is an incredible lever for driving change, right? Purchasing happens every single day. It follows, you know, normal business process. It's a core of any organization. So unlike a sustainability project, which might be, oh, that's nice to have and everything, but now there's a recession, so we're going to cut back. Purchasing keeps voting for the products and services that we want, right? And so I think, you know, one of the things that we always talk about, particularly with the folks that are just starting out, is that sustainable purchasing doesn't mean you abandoned regular purchasing. You know, you're going to do purchasing that achieves value for money and strengthens your organization and meets your performance requirements, right? The sustainability attributes are over and above that, so that you're not only strengthening your organization, you're also helping strengthen society, have a healthy environment, and so forth. So that's one of the first things to sort of cross off the anxiety sort of list is you're not abandoning price and performance. You're not abandoning those other requirements. You're adding other best value requirements, basically. So, so I'm sorry, back to your question of, you know, how do you connect sustainability and procurement? As you alluded to, a lot of public sustainable purchasing is driven by legislative mandates or executive, you know, governors' mandates and so forth. So first of all, you've got that mandate and you've got other departments of state government or of your city government, et cetera, that can help you. So if you're looking to understand something about an environmental sustainability issue, and you've been, for example, people are probably now being tasked with, okay, we've got a big climate reduction goal for our state. We need procurement to be aware of and drive climate, you know, emissions reductions through our procurement. Well, that's a pretty big mission, right? For someone who's like, I'm a category manager. I know a lot about my product and service category, but I really don't know about that. However, if it's a legislative mandate, you usually can tap into your environmental department, your you know, commerce department to look for local companies. There are ways to tap into the whole kind of architecture of state government to find the expertise that you need to bring to bear on whatever category, whatever issue you're being expected to shoulder. So that's the first thing I would say is, you know, reach out to the other stakeholders that are addressing the issue that you're now tasked with and try and get them to feed you information and support what you're doing. And in fact, I should make a shameless plug for, we have a white paper, which is called Maximizing Engagement in Sustainable Procurement, which is specifically based on a set of interviews with our public sector folks and kind of how did they do that.
Shameless plugs are welcome on
welcome.
LinkedIn Live.
Well, we've actually got two, one of which was largely focused on the private sector and getting investment in your program. And the second one, our public sector folks who went to them and said, well, how do you get investment? And most of them said, oh no, we've got a mandate. We've already got the, you know, sort of the power to do it. Our issue is engaging other people in government to help us carry this out, whether it's procurement managers, whether it's people, you know, end users and so forth. And so we collected sort of their collective wisdom on ways to do that and ways to support growing engagement across, across the procurement department and others.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I
because
had a
it's really
conversation with a procurement person from a fairly, certainly in the upper range of population in the country. And I asked
yeah,
about it, and they said, well, our environmental office does that kind of thing. And
it's
I
that.
said, right. But then within categories, there's ways to have small form things. And it was just that it's that connection between
Yeah.
how do we make a practical impact? And so we made an I made an infographic after that phone call that said, out of the conversations that I've had, where are some of the practical places where this touches procurement? And even if
Mhm.
the state doesn't consider themselves to be on one end of the spectrum or another, there's practical things like on, do we want our toner cartridges to be
Yeah.
multi-use? Do we want to have recyclable material as a component? Like, it doesn't have to be the commit all the way to the edge to
Right.
start saying there should be some standards. And so our infographic laid out like 15 areas that we saw consistently, and then we worked those into the survey. So
Yeah.
I'm interested in, how do you talk to someone who says, I don't necessarily have the mandate to go out and
Right.
carbon load all of our transport logistics costs, but we
Right.
should have a standard for what recyclable paper is. Like,
Right.
where are the levels, and how can they figure out like ways to start?
Well, starting somewhere is the most important, not to just say, hey, somebody else is doing it, it's not my business. So I definitely agree with you that, being able to take small steps is important. And, small steps across multiple product categories adds up. It really does. The impact of public procurement, as you know, is huge. It's a large sector of GDP, and it really does make a difference. So people can start, as I think you've been working on the eco-label side of things, people can start by using reputable eco-labels where you know that it's been developed in a multi-stakeholder way, following, ANSI for the U.S., but other standards. So it's credible. It's not just an industry kind of seal of approval that maybe, gives extra stars to what's already happening instead of kind of moving beyond that. You want to look for something that provides its own assessment. One of the things that people get into as they start this journey is, oh no, now I have to check everybody's homework. I've asked them to show me, all of the chemicals in their product, and now I have to assess them. Well, no, you want to look for, in that case, a reputable accreditation or review to say, no, there aren't highly toxic chemicals in this. This falls within your, new policy. So making sure to build in verification by a third party, which you don't pay for, you're not involved in, is a really important first step for people when they're using eco-labels, and simplifies your job immensely. The other thing is looking for, often these days, more modern eco-labels will have, and actually even suppliers will show levels of environmental preferability. So, I remember long ago, my friend Yama Siddiqui at Office Depot put together a whole program for light green, medium green, and deep green, so that if you really wanted, you wanted to buy recycled paper, but you couldn't quite afford the price premium on 100% recycled paper, you could go for that medium green, which was 30% recycled and not bleached with chlorine. So, again, starting out looking for that gradated or graduated label is really helpful, because you may be able to begin by saying, I used to work for the EPEAT label, which is for IT, and it had bronze, silver, gold. People could say, well, I'm going to go for bronze because those are, I use computers from a local manufacturer. I still want to do that. I've got a systems integrator that we've used for 40 years. I don't want to just dump them because they can't hit the highest level. So they would say, okay, I'm going to require bronze. I'll get my local vendors in, and then I'll encourage them to move up. One of the things that we always, and this is sort of standard procurement, but we always talk about with sustainability, and particularly for folks who want to keep or who need to keep small suppliers, local suppliers, in the boat, is to signal, to prefer, and then to require, right? So first you say, in our next contract, when we reopen this contract, we're going to be looking for these environmental attributes. So that's 2 years from now. Everybody has time. We can offer you some information or some training or a vendor conference or something to talk about this issue and how you can begin to address it. But we're not booting you out or anything right now. Secondly, we're going to prefer those folks that can show that they're meeting that criterion, the 100% recycled paper. But we're not going to exclude anybody. They're just going to get some extra points. They're going to be, raising to the top. But finally, maybe 5 years out, we need you to actually begin to learn and move along this trajectory with us.
Well, I'm definitely interested in eco labels and marketplace, but let's pop up a couple of comments that have happened so far and maybe take one. So one was, can you point us to where the white paper that you've mentioned, so where would somebody find that?
So you can find it on our website at sustainablepurchasing.org. I can put it in the chat probably.
Okay. Sometimes the chat's a little wonky, so if you can't,
well, we can do it with a follow-up.
I'll put it in the LinkedIn chat afterwards.
Sure. So it's
and what was the span of that report?
That is 6 strategies for engaging stakeholders around sustainable procurement.
Okay.
And that, it's on our website, sustainablepurchasing.org.
And then Richard Pennington asked, one of the challenges in evaluating competing responses in different types of RFPs is the guidance on how to evaluate some of this criteria, where sustainability may be one of many standards. So how do you balance, how have you seen people try to incorporate this? Is it just simply putting in requirements and then that's kind of a pass fail? Have you seen people trying to say, we give more points based on how much you meet our standards? So what are some examples that you've seen of how people, maybe somebody who's just trying to just start versus somebody who it's really what they're trying to drive?
Yeah, it's a great question. And obviously, like everything else, it sort of falls along a gradation according to how prepared you are to, deal with the consequences. So I think, the place people usually start is, first of all, by identifying contract categories where there are a lot of sustainable alternatives available. I mean, we've mentioned recycled paper, and I think that's just because 30 years ago, or maybe a little more now, the federal government said we're going to require recycled content in our copy paper, and that was a huge driver for change. So now we can all access recycled content. That's an easy one to say. I just require it. I don't. Nobody else is in the pool. Right. But for things like, reduced carbon concrete, for example, well, that's kind of a real specialty item. There are a lot of people working on it, reducing the amount of concrete emitted in the production of concrete. But right now, there's sort of a few options. They are higher cost. The carbon reduction is not that significant. So in that kind of a situation, giving added points, and saying, we value the effort, we value the product, we're going to give it a little edge, but if it's, still more costly than we can afford right now, we'll have to wait till the next round. So I think there are a number of ways, the really committed leaders on this stuff set, in or out baselines. So, you either provide something that meets our needs, and this is getting more and more, critical for particularly private companies, but also, states and others who have made big commitments, particularly on climate, on the social side, to, community benefit from their purchasing and so forth. When you've made that kind of a big commitment and put it out to the world and you really need to execute, you've moved beyond when it's just a few points and maybe you'll get ahead of somebody. It really becomes, for me to meet my commitments as an organization, for the state of California to meet their climate commitments, everything we purchase is going to have to show a reduction in climate. So we are going to prefer the product that is lower carbon every time. And then, you have to meet all the other attributes as well. So it's really, it's partly a taste for, it's partly the level of commitment of the overall organization and their ability to tolerate, well, gee, maybe we'll have to pay more for X.
I do want to come to the cost choice thing here in a second, but so on eco labeling, right? So I obviously don't claim to be a sustainability expert, but I feel like I am pretty good at procurement, and I was quickly overwhelmed by what an eco label is, right? I mean, there had to be 40 or 50 different eco labels on the EPA site, right? And then there's all the different type of labels for construction standards and the rest. So I can see how someone who maybe hasn't done anything with it looks at it and quickly falls into analysis paralysis. I'm like, how do I use this? So how does somebody who's trying to improve, maybe at minimum, they're trying to add certain things to their contract portfolio or to their catalog portfolio that give the end users choice? Like, how do they start to how do they come into this without feeling like it's too much for them to learn and they can't afford the cycles? Like, how does somebody get their feet into it without having to understand every single piece of it?
Great question, and one that
and maybe that's something you guys solve, right?
It is part of what we do. It is part of what we do. We try and say, what are the priority impacts in this category? So, recycled content may not matter if something is so toxic that it kills your janitorial staff over time if they use it. Okay. So one thing is that sort of prioritization of what's really important in this category. The other, again, is looking for the multi-attribute standards, because, the multi-attribute standard is trying to say, okay, we want it somewhat less toxic, some recycled content, lower energy use, sort of all those things you might want in an ideal product. A multi-attribute standard is trying to at least touch on. And having been in on the development of the EPEAT standard long ago, that's a pretty good consensus. You get hundreds of people from all perspectives. You get a lot of debate, sometimes just endlessly painful debate, and you really do come out with a pretty good balance of what the global stakeholder group thinks is most important and most attainable. Right. So, using those multi-attribute standards is kind of a baseline recommendation. And I think, the proliferation of eco labels, I think when I was doing electronics, there were 300 different global electronics labels, and, every country issued their own, different attributes were, reviewed. And I think that, again, looking for a place like the SPLC or another place that you can meet with other purchasers, you find out pretty quickly, oh, you know what? This one covers 80% of what you're going to need. So just, pick and use this one. There's plenty of product available, which is, as a young environmentalist, that was a big learning curve for me was, you know what? We've got to get 3 bids and you can specify the most beautiful, wonderful product ever. But if I only get 2, you're in trouble and I'm in trouble. We can't do that, right? So it's picking that eco label also that has a realistic kind of mid to top of the market in terms of sustainability performance, but isn't just saying, everything has to be perfect right now, or we can't buy products because, buying products is what procurement is in the business of. So when it comes to eco labels, really, and other specifications and policies and so forth, we really advocate for the time-honored, copy paste tradition. Look at what other organizations your size are doing. Look at what the federal government is doing or the eco labels that they've reviewed, and figure that these people have been doing it a long time. I can pull those down and use them everywhere.
Well, and as you said at the start, it helps the vendors to comply, right? Like if the standard is known, then it means that we help to create and enable a market, right? And so we've been talking a lot about procurement and sustainability. So then one thing that you see procurement do more and more is try to to negotiate like a basket of goods, like an office supply or MRO or some of the different buckets, wherein they may identify certain things as being more green than other things, right? And so I'd like to have a conversation about how procurement presents choices to the end user.
Yeah.
There may be some departments that care a lot more about some of this than others. How have you seen people try to inform the end users? Commonwealth of Massachusetts has a directory of their environmentally preferred goods and services that's a downloadable document. I think other people try to actually do the cliche leaf in an electronic procurement system to be able to tag something as having a green characteristic. So how does procurement then take the action and then load the ability for the end user to make choices that are good choices for their programs?
It's a great question, and one that I know you work on ERP development with a bunch of folks, and one that people are more and more integrating into their electronic systems for sure. I think there are a couple of, as you noted, there are a couple of ways of doing it. One is to kind of tag items and say, all things being equal, buy the greener alternative. There are some, I know long ago with the Grainger catalog, the state of Massachusetts, Commonwealth of Massachusetts had a pop-up where it would say, you've selected a mercury containing product. Here's the alternative that doesn't contain mercury. That was, very useful because right at the point of purchase, you were like, oh, okay, I can just click on this one. It's the same thing performance wise. The other way that people tend to do this is to work with a vendor. This is particularly with office supplies or other, small goods where people are just going with a card, buying some pencils or whatever, is to actually create a portal that is just for the customer. So I know EPA did this. Obviously, they have large purchasing power, but no larger than a lot of states. EPA is not that big. Where, you go to an Office Depot or Office Max or whatever, and it only presents you sign in, and it only presents you with the products that are on contract for your particular organization. That's, that's choice editing is the nice thing to call that, which just means you only get the choices that are compatible with the sustainability requirements. When it's more left to the end user, there's a lot of leakage. People just don't know. They're not in a portal that shows them exactly what they need, and so we do see that a lot of the real success around compliance comes from, and this is true with other other attributes, other programs, comes with that kind of choice editing, or at least a kind of active, hey, this isn't on our list. Look on the list for this item. Some active intervention kind of at that point of purchase, because people have a lot on their minds, as you say.
Right. There's always been a perception, at least at some point, that greener product is more expensive. And certainly as manufacturers are making changes to be able to incorporate different things, I can see why that would be true. But then at some point, the market has absorbed some of the change to do the greener topic, right? Or, just because we make a choice to harvest wood from a sustainable forest program as opposed to another one doesn't have to inherently mean one costs more than another. So talk about the question about, does sustainable products always cost more than non-sustainable products? I mean, I could see how adding remanufactured components to a product might make it cheaper in some cases. So talk about the cost dynamic.
Sure. I think that cost dynamic, at first had to do with, as you say, kind of the innovation cycle. People were doing something new. It was an untested marketplace, or it was a small marketplace. So many things 25 years ago, many green alternatives were more expensive. They were sold in less volume, so forth and so on. At this point, in most categories, that's not going to be true, that there's a fundamental cost adder that results in green products being more expensive. Sometimes vendors will try to sell them, as more expensive because they're more specialized and so forth. But usually what we've seen is that if you're a large purchaser and you're a skilled purchaser, the negotiation can wipe out a lot of that differential, even if one exists among the green products and the less green products. So that's the first thing, is use your skills as a procurement person to do the kinds of negotiation that you do around any contract around price. Look for volume, look for a exclusive relationship. There are other things you can trade for the lower cost. And the other thing is that there are many solution strategies beyond just substituting one product for another. So there are, what we usually look at. I mean, I should have printed it so I could hold it up, but we have a whole sheet of sort of 20 different solution strategies for trying to drive forward at, even or reduced cost plus the environmental benefit, some of which have to do with use reduction. I mean, a classic example is print management. Right. So everybody used to have a printer at their desk. First of all, you spent a whole ton of money on those printers. Second of all, those printers were just cranking out paper all the time, using up ink all the time, because people would print a draft and, look at it and toss it. So that was very high cost. So rather than, when at first people were like, oh, we should have policies about not printing, or we should have this and that. When folks went through, an HP or another vendor, a big print management program, they found, first of all, they weren't buying the individual printers. You're buying one big centralized printer. Second of all, people aren't printing that thing out just to look at it they'd rather sit in their office than walk all the way to a central printer. So they actually tend to look at something on their screen and fix it. I mean, in many cases, I know Alameda County did a program like this where they wanted to buy 100% recycled content, and they felt that, their paper budget was already kind of hitting its ceiling. Couldn't do that. So they worked on change management around managed print services, around taking, everybody's individual printer away from their desk. And they found that in the end, they could buy the 100% recycled content and still save about $120,000 a year on their paper and print costs. But they really saw the need, and early on developed a strategy, which wasn't just, hey, we're going to, use the 100% paper, 100% recycled paper, and
right.
Who cares about the cost? They found a way to manage. Similarly,
you just laid out has a total cost of ownership element, which we haven't really even used that phrase so far in this, right? But we did a strategic sourcing assessment for a state client where one of the things we looked at was their approach to printing and copying. And in a lower wall cube situation, literally of the 4 cubes that touched, there'd be a printer in each cube. So just from the pure math of not buying a bunch of toner to dry out in individual areas, but be able to say, what's the impression load for this particular area, and what is the right thing? And if somebody needs to have a printer because they're printing secure things or something, that can be part of a balance. But absolutely, that's a great example where thinking about the approach to print in that situation, the most sustainable answer may well be the most cost-effective answer.
Yeah, exactly. And total cost of ownership is the deal. I mean, another great example when I worked with the healthcare sector was, they were buying materials that had to be qualified as hazardous waste at the end of life. And that's a huge cost center, right? When you have to get a Subtitle C, RCRA certified hauler to haul everything. At the time, actually, computer monitors were in there because they were so full of lead. But there were a number of items that if you didn't look at that waste cost, they seemed much cheaper and people liked them and you were all set, right? But once you brought together the folks who touch that product on its life cycle through the organization, you find these, unanticipated or kind of recorded costs in the total cost of ownership that are significant, issues. And you find those waste people who are like, no one ever asked us about this. We just bundle it up and ship it out at a cost of thousands, but we'd really much rather, manage it as part of our recycling stream or something. So again, thinking about that full stakeholder, you don't have to have endless conferences with everybody, but as you launch into a new initiative, bring in the folks in your organization who touch that in some way, the end users, again, in healthcare, we found that absentee and illness costs for janitorial staff went down with more sustainable, less VOC emitting
Interesting.
floor strippers, floor waxers, that kind of thing. So they're even, I mean, those weren't really a quantifiable cost, but they were a real cost in a very large health system to say, oh yeah, we don't seem to see our janitors, getting sick with respiratory illnesses as much. That's a plus for us. Let's make sure that we, count that into the overall picture. So it's really a strategic sourcing approach. It's figuring out the total cost of ownership. It's figuring out best value, and kind of accepting that sustainability, whether immediate exposure to workers, whether emissions to the community, whether the mining that had to happen for a specific product to be produced, those impacts are part of best value, and trying to avoid those negative impacts and enhance the positive impacts is really a best value proposition. It's really a strategic sourcing objective along with your other objectives, rather than a kind of slap it on at the end with a checkbox.
Well, I think it's an excellent summary as a way to kind of bring us towards the end.
In most of these instances, really, it's not kind of an add-on, okay, now it's better. It's really just thinking through the implications and thinking through the environmental and social implications as well. I mean, I have great faith in the procurement profession, because I've seen it go from sort of just category-based, check boxes to, the level of strategic sourcing and intensive supplier engagement and innovation conversations and so forth that procurement undertakes now. And so I think that this integration of sustainability into procurement eventually, will become just the norm as we move forward.
So as we come into the end here, so if there's a state or an entity that isn't doing very much of this kind of stuff and they're trying to get that, where are there some practices I can start infusing? Is that something that they can come to your group, and is that in that white paper that you mentioned? Would that be a good place?
It's in the white paper, sure. They can come. Actually, we have a whole little section on our website at sustainablepurchasing.org that says it's programs getting started. And it's kind of there's a sustainable purchasing 101 that you can look at, you can share with colleagues. There's the white papers. There's some other resources that are just really kind of, how do I get started? And then of course, I should pitch membership in our organization. We do, as part of membership. I was going to
tee a softball up for you at the end.
Well, one of the things that we do is coaching. And some coaching is really helpful for folks that are starting out. So
as we're in our wind down here, I'll restate that Civic, we work with public sector on a variety of different transformation projects. We do this kind of content just to raise up issues and bring them. So we talk to people too about different topics. We have a survey that we're doing on environmentally preferable purchasing that we're trying to still get some responses into that we'll use to drive some other content in the future. That's in this. It's in the scroll below. It's at www.civicinitiatives.com/EPP. So Richard Pennington also asked, does your organization support like eval committees who may want to be advised on a particular procurement or a relationship? How does that touch your relationship with industry? So maybe in our final shameless plugs here, right? Like what do you guys do for public entities? Like how far down the chain do you go, so that if somebody's interested in talking to you guys, that they can kind of context what the service or what the options are in dealing with you?
Sure. Right now we are a membership organization because we're small and we're kind of holding that until we get a little bigger and we can do more outside consulting. We do have a number of coaching modalities. So some are included in membership, some are a la carte paid engagements, and we're intending over the course of this year to make some of those available to outside entities. What we usually pitch, because it's the truth, is you can get that coaching and a whole lot more by joining as a member. It is sliding scale. So even for small organizations, small cities, counties, etc., we're very affordable. I encourage you to go to the website and look at there's 20 tiers or something, so I won't rattle them off here. But it really is, it's sliding scale in order to welcome people in. And, within membership, there's not only the coaching, there's a whole batch of resources, case studies, category guidance, stuff to really get you started. Or if you're an innovator, keep you in the lead. We also do peer learning circles, and that's something our members really enjoy, where we have small groups of 6 to 8 people who meet monthly, and basically they're in the same sector and they just share challenges. One person is nominated, I'm tearing my hair out with X. The others feed them resources, consultants, whatever they've found in their experience has worked on that problem. So that's a great opportunity for folks too, to connect with others in this field who are, as I say, often, 1 or 2 people trying to turn a very big ship. So finding that fellowship and peer support is a great piece of what we do. So, yep. And, plenty of public sector members in there who would love to welcome you and help hold your hand.
Good stuff.
If anyone's got questions, I'm happy to share my email and a few more resources, whatever would be useful. We've got, as I say, starting resources right on the website, so we can make sure you guys can access those easily and keep moving forward.
You can say your email in the air and it'll transcribe it automatically. So.
Oh, that's right. It's Sarah, SARAH, at sustainablepurchasing.org.
Well, that's pretty simple.
I forgot. Transcription. Yes, that's very simple. And encourage folks to visit. We also do have a series of events coming up. First one is May 26th, and it's about purchasing in support of economic, racial, and environmental equity. So really looking at kind of environmental justice, community wealth building, and impact and anchor purchasing, which are strategies to build up local employment, local businesses, et cetera, kind of beyond just the supplier diversity discipline to a bigger kind of look at how purchasing can drive change for the better throughout local communities and societies. And it includes a workshop which folks might be interested in on engaging with suppliers around environmental sustainability. That's hosted by and led by Tiffany Gonzalez from PG&E, who works with many, many small suppliers to kind of engage and develop their capacity to deliver environmentally sustainable products and services. So might be of interest. We're also doing a supply chain greenhouse gas emissions, July 22nd, and then looking at sustainability rating and reporting systems and how purchasing can leverage them for supplier engagement and overall improvement, over time. That's September 29th. So all the keynotes and panels for those are free. So if you come to our website, you'll see the links. Really encourage folks to jump in and get started with some great speakers and great new and developing areas of work.
Well, excellent. Well, I'm glad I could highlight your work, and it's very interesting to me. So, we will be happy to be helpful with you guys and take a look at some of that as well. And Joanna was on top of it and put some of that stuff in the LinkedIn chat. So if somebody's watching this real time, they'll see the chats over there, and we'll be good to go.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for having me. All right. So, thanks so much, Justin. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks everybody for listening in chat, and I hope that it was a useful topic for you. Thanks. Yeah. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Hi, it's Dustin Lanier. Thanks for listening. Please find me on LinkedIn for original public sector operations content every week. And please reach out to me if I and my team of procurement professionals at Civic Initiatives can help you be a public procurement change agent.